Welcome to Speaking of Grace, the weekly message podcast from the Whole Life Church in Orlando, Florida. We're a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-generational congregation committed to our mission of loving people into a lifelong friendship with God. We are committed to our vision of being a church without walls, fully engaged in serving the people of our community. Thank you for joining us as we continue Speaking of Grace.
Thank you so much, worship team. Did that give you goosebumps just like it did me? It is. I wish everybody could have the experience of kind of standing up here or being in that front row and hearing you sing, because it's amazing. So we are at the third part of a 5-part series that we're calling The Unreasonable Church. And if you are just jumping in right now, let me just take a moment to kind of catch you up a little bit. The series is based off of a book called Unreasonable Hospitality by a guy named Will Guidara. And the sermon series takes a look at what it would mean to be an unreasonable church. And I know the word unreasonable is not always a positive word. We kind of think about it as a negative word sometimes. However, if you've ever experienced really good service at a restaurant or somewhere you're shopping, you know that unreasonable can be a very good thing. It's the thing where you're like, yes, that was, I had no expectation that it would be this good. And we're really grateful for that. So there is good unreasonable and there's bad unreasonable. And what we're really talking about in this series is what would it look like to be the good unreasonable as a church. And we're not really talking just about like Christianity in general or even like the churches in Orlando or the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We're really talking about what would it look like for whole life to be an unreasonable church. What would that mean? And so today we're going to be talking about specifically belonging. But before we jump into that, would you pray with me? Lord, we invite you to continue putting your spirit into us. We felt you move through the music this morning. We heard you when Phil was praying. And now, Lord, as we get to the spoken word, we want to hear you. We do not want to hear Ken. We want to hear what you have to say. And so, Lord, I pray that you would get me out of the way and that you would say exactly what you want to say. And I pray that each person here would hear exactly what you prepared for them to hear. In your name I ask it. Amen. So last week I asked what it would look like if there were an award for the best church in the world. If there was a top 50 best churches in the world, what would it look like? Now, we know that universities get ranked, right? There's the number one university for this, for that. We know that healthcare systems can be ranked, right? I know this because driving down I-4, I see billboards that tell me that Advent Health is number one, which I already knew. Come on, we're the hospital church. Even though our name is Whole Life, we've always been the hospital church. But what would it be like if churches actually were ranked? If we said these are the top 50 churches in the world, in the United States, in Orlando, where would Whole Life fall in that? And we also talked about that it really doesn't matter what people think. We'd really care about God's opinion. I mean, we do care what people think, but the person that we're really trying to do this for is God, so that he'll be glorified. So what would the criteria be for being the greatest church? I told you there are 5 things that came to my mind. The first one is love. That's the first one we preached on during the first sermon of this series. And I told you that everything else flows out of that, out of love. God is love. And so everything else comes out of that. Last week we talked about hospitality. We're going to be talking about generosity and inspiration in the next 2 weeks, but today I want to talk to you about belonging. And does belonging really even matter? Is belonging even really an important thing? Well, when you hear that word, I want to ask you what you feel. Take a moment just to let that word belonging kind of roll around your mind for a moment. What emotions does that bring to you? What do you feel when you think about the word belonging? I hear acceptance, worth, safe, maybe alignment. Would that be one? Maybe you feel like alignment when you belong, you feel like you're kind of have the same trajectory as a group? Accepted, yeah. So you guys have thrown out some really great words. You've thrown out some really wonderful words. For me, when I think about belonging, it takes me to maybe, I kind of picture like a happy place for myself. It's like, this place of warmth and where you feel cared about, where you know you matter. But for those who maybe don't have belonging in their life right now, that word can also make you feel kind of cold, angry. Does anybody else ever get angry when you've wanted to belong somewhere and the answer was no? When you felt rejected? It hurts. Belonging matters, but I want to tell you that belonging goes a lot deeper than just being, well, it's a nice thing. When I was researching this, I came across an article in the National Institute for Health's medical library. Really well-researched article that talked about the importance of belonging. I want to share one short snippet out of that article with you. Indeed, a sense of belonging may be just as important as food, shelter, and physical safety for promoting health and survival in the long run. Let that sink in for a minute. Belonging is not just simply some sort of warm, fuzzy, well, that would be nice. I mean, if I told you you don't really need food, you would tell me, come on, Ken. If I took away your shelter, if I threw you out in the middle of the woods in the middle of the winter up in Canada, you might feel like you're going to be in trouble. And that would probably be a very correct feeling. If I threw you into a dangerous situation, in a dangerous part of town late at night, you might be concerned for your safety. You might feel like I wasn't a very nice person to do that to you. And so if we're going to throw the word belonging in with food, shelter, and safety, what does it mean if I don't extend belonging to you? What does it mean if I say, oh, that's not a big deal? And that's up to you. You figure it out. I would say that food, shelter, physical safety, we'd say those are probably just basic human rights, right? Something that people have a right to expect. That if somebody's lacking those things, as a society, we have a need, a responsibility to help that person out. And I think that as Christians, we have a responsibility to help people find belonging. We have a responsibility for it. It matters. One person that I encountered in my research was a lady by the name of Amelia Frank Meyer, and she did a TEDx talk. And during that talk, she said something that, I knew it, but it's like, well, yeah. She goes, well, think about why belonging might matter so much. Why might belonging matter? Well, she said, think about it. You are literally born tethered to another human being. You literally come out connected to your mother. You are connected to another human being. And that really hit me because I thought that's exactly right. When God created us, we came out connected to God. And ever since, God has made connection a part of the human experience. That we need each other, that we need relationship, that we need to be together, that we need to feel belonging. But Amelia took it one step further for me during that TEDx talk. Amelia said this: connection is not the same as being claimed. That kind of smacked me because we spent all last year talking about connection, right? We say connection's important. But it really hit me, she's right. Connection is not the same as being claimed because connection does not equal belonging. Being claimed equals belonging. Those are my people. That's my group. Hey, Ken's with us, being claimed. One of my very favorite Christian artists, who sadly passed away many years ago, Rich Mullins, wrote a song called Elijah. It's in my top 3 favorite Christian songs ever. And in that song, he wrote these lyrics. There's people been friendly, but they'd never be your friend. Sometimes this has bent me to the ground. Can you relate with that? I think if you're human, you must be able to relate with it. We've all experienced that, right? Very nice people, very friendly people, but they're not going to be your friend. And family, this is where churches have the opportunity to level up. One of the things that almost every church I've ever been to likes to tell me, whether it's true or not, is that they are a friendly church. We're a friendly church. That's great. But just because you're a friendly church doesn't mean that you're going to be a friend. It doesn't mean that you are claiming the people that come to your church. And if we want to talk about being one of the greatest churches, we have to move past congratulating ourselves for being friendly and move to the point where each one of us feel a responsibility for creating belonging. Saying you're claimed, you matter. I see you by yourself, and I will not simply come up and shake your hand, but I will actually care about your life. I will be a friend. I will claim you as part of my family, a part of who we are. There's a reason why I say family so much here. It's because if we want to be an organization, that's a completely different thing than being a family. And that really hit me as I was researching this sermon, because I started thinking about metaphors and things like that. And you know the one that came to my mind? The one that came to my mind is adoption. Adoption came to my mind. And so I started kind of looking up YouTube. By the way, if you want to spend like a couple hours just bawling your eyes out, just watch just type adoption videos into your YouTube search and let the tears go. One of my very favorite ones that I came across is the one I want to show you right now. But before I show it to you, what I want to ask you to do is take your brain and shift it to metaphorical mode. What do I mean by that? I want you to watch this video, but I want you to view the video as not a true story, which it is, that Good Morning America aired. Thank you, Good Morning America, for contributing to my sermon today. What I want you to do is not simply view it as that. I want you to metaphorically look at it and ask yourselves, how would this compare to a number one church in God's eyes that practiced belonging? What aspects of this story could I metaphorically look at and say, this is how our church should be too? So you ready? Can we do this? Your brain switched into metaphorical mode? I think so. All right, let's go.
I was an angry, troubled child, and I picked a fight with one of my classmates in the cafeteria, and I threw yogurt on her, and then I got sent to the principal's office.
The first time I had met her, she was already sitting in my outer office. One of my assistant principals had already dealt with the behavior and actually had suspended her. She was just this sweet-looking, little innocent child sitting there, kind of defeated, hopeless. So I asked her, is that appropriate behavior? Is that something that you would do if you were out at a restaurant with your family or friends? And that's when she said no, that she didn't get to go to restaurants. So I'd ask her, okay, so why, don't you go to restaurants? And she said, well, that she lived in a group home and they just never got a chance to go. So at that point, I had felt like she just needed a hand, needed help. Recognized that she needed something to go in her favor, maybe for once.
I knew that when Jason brought it up, that it wasn't something that he was taking lightly because of our heartbreak before. We had been through infertility treatments. We had tried for years to have kids of our own, even though Fraven would be open to coming and living with the principal.
It was really weird at first because, like, in my mind, I thought of him as the bad guy because I was always, like, getting in trouble, but it was my fault. And so it was, like, really weird at first. But then for my first weekend visitation, they made me feel like extremely welcome, like I was already in the family. I feel like I always knew that they were going to be my parents.
She came to live with us on June 23rd, 2015. And we fostered her for about 2.5 years before we were able to adopt her. She's brought purpose to our lives. So, I mean, she has given us as much as we have given her, if not more. So we can't imagine what life would be like without her at this point.
All kids, regardless of age, need an opportunity to feel loved, to be successful, and to make something of themselves. And unfortunately, she really hadn't had that by the age of 11. She hadn't had those opportunities. So every child can be successful. They just need somebody to support them and be in their corner to help them overcome the difficulties of life.
You want to watch it again? Unreasonable churches, good, unreasonable churches offer belonging before they expect belief and conformity. You with me? Reasonable churches, reasonable organizations, the world says, check off the checklist and pay your dues, and then you can belong, right? That's what the gym tells me. Pay, and you can come hang out. That's what your local club says, country club. You're going to wear clothes a certain way. You're going to look a certain way. You're going to pay a certain price. And then you can belong. But God never intended for his church to mirror the way the world does things. God always intended for you to belong before you believe. To belong before you conformed. To have a sense that you are claimed and wanted before you look like everybody else and act like everybody else. That principle adopted Raven before she got her behavior all figured out. I know that when he adopted her, he dreamed of what she would become and what she could be with the love and nurture that is given through belonging. But I also believe that he would have kept loving her even if those behaviors didn't change quickly, or maybe change at all. His responsibility was to accept and love and help her on her journey. And family, as a church, that's what God expects from us. When people find this place, my prayer is that they find belonging, no matter what they look like or how they're acting to start things off. That doesn't mean that we don't have expectations. The principal had expectations, but those expectations aren't tied to you don't belong anymore. They're tied to, I love you, wouldn't you like to be a better version of you? Because that's really what transformation is about in the Christian sense. We don't want people to change to make us more comfortable. Well, let's be honest, sometimes that's exactly what we want. But in Christ, we want people to change because it makes their life better, because it gives them more whole life. So family, what about us? Is that the kind of belonging that we're going to practice at Whole Life? I believe it is. It's been a part of this church's DNA for a long time. Andy McDonald, our pastor here, senior pastor for 37 years that I had the privilege of coming after, texted me after first service. And he said, Ken, back in the 80s and 90s, our tagline was a place to belong. It's who we are. But it's time for us to remind a new generation of Whole Life that this is a place to belong. Before belief, before conformity, this is a place to belong, a place to be loved for who you are, not in spite of who you are. Why do we do this? Because we want to be like God, who showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. If you are looking for belonging and struggling to find it, I want to ask you to make yourself vulnerable and share that. Share that with some of the pastoral team. Share it with some of the people that are around you. Hey, I'm having a hard time feeling like I belong here. Let us walk with you in that. Another way to find belonging is to go out in the lobby here and find a place to volunteer. It's amazing when you're serving and helping how quickly you find like-minded people who you start feeling that belonging with. But I also want to remind you that belonging requires two people, right? You have to extend belonging two ways. I offer you belonging, you accept belonging and say, I want to belong, and vice versa. So let us today, as a church, commit to looking for the people on the outskirts, the people who haven't been claimed, the people who walk in, sit down, walk back out, the people online who are watching right now and feel lonely because they don't have human interaction with other like believers. Let's commit to creating belonging for all. That doesn't mean people have to accept it. They don't. But I do believe it's our responsibility as Christ followers to extend it, to extend belonging. Hear God's heart when he says, but now, O Jacob. Remember Jacob in the Old Testament? He messes up so much. He's a complete disaster. His name means usurper, deceiver. And then God says, but now, Jacob, listen to the Lord who created you. And then he gives him a new name, O Israel. God perseveres. Are we going to be like God, and are we going to persevere with the relationships that God puts in our way? The one who formed you says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Insert your name in there. But now Ken, listen to the Lord who created you. Ken, the one who formed you, says, don't be afraid. I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. You belong. God has claimed you, and Whole Life wants to claim you too. If you are looking for a place of belonging, welcome to Whole Life. Welcome home. You belong.
Hi, this is Randy McGray, podcast producer and host here at Whole Life Church. Loving people into a lifelong friendship with God is our mission at the Whole Life Church, and our podcasts are designed to help facilitate conversations that help us grow together in that pursuit. Now that you've heard the message for this week, don't forget to check out the Whole Life takeaways for this message. Swipe up in today's show notes and join the conversation. Speaking of conversations, each Wednesday morning we take a closer look at the week's message. That's right, the one you just listened to. We discuss practical ways to apply spiritual lessons and ask, honest questions about the issues we face as Christians, all focused through the lens of grace. Your voice is a welcomed addition to that conversation. We encourage your thoughts and your questions by sending a voicemail or text to 407-965-1607 or send an email to podcast@wholelife.church. You can find everything podcast related on our website, wholelife.church/podcast. And plan on spending every Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning with us as we bring you the Whole Life Church inspiration you love straight into your headphones. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.